that would be my question for you, is that we came out with this out-of-box piece a few weeks ago that OPEC might be dissembling in a not too distant future. How does this outpour of oil from the US play into this?
Massively. I mean, basically, OPEC is an attempt to run a price cartel on oil. To have a monopoly on oil, to set the prices as you wish. That would be illegal in most businesses, but when we're talking in the international oil trade, it's not really illegal because who's going to judge them? Anyway, if you want to run a price cartel or a pseudo monopoly on something, you better control most of the markets. Hello out there and welcome to this week's edition of GeoPortfolio. My name is Mikkel Rosenvold. I'm a partner and head of geopolitical research here at Stena Research. And in this show, we try and have a look at GeoPortfolio that's maybe a little bit more cynical, or at least more suited towards your portfolio and your investment needs than many of the other shows you find here on YouTube. So that's our aim in this show. We are part of Stena Research, which is a global macro and geopolitical research house. We offer a variety of services. Among them is a subscription service on stenaresearch.com, where you can get full access to all our macro investing, crypto, geopolitical, and a lot of other content, as well as our model portfolio with actionable and tradable intel right away. So jump into stenaresearch.com, sign up for a 14-day trial, or if you just want to hear this show, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to get notifications whenever we post a new edition of GeoPortfolio. So, with me today to discuss geopolitical's relevant GeoPortfolio, I have my usual sidekick, Anne, live from Paris. Welcome to you, Anne.
Thank you. Happy to be a sidekick.
Oh, it wasn't meant that bad as it sounded, perhaps.
No, it's the best compliment I've ever gotten.
How are things in Paris?
Paris are grey. Paris is rainy. I can't imagine Denmark being much better, but here we are.
No. We've even had a little bit of snow here, so would be nice to get some of the weather they're having down in the Middle East. That's about the only thing we can envy the Middle East at the moment, I think. So and on the topic, on the agenda for today, we're going to talk a little bit about Iran, US, of course. I wrote an article about that. We're going to talk about why oil isn't going up, if the oil prices have actually peaked. And then we're going to be looking a little bit into an interesting election coming up in the outskirts of the Middle East, you could probably say. More on that a little later. First, I'd like to bring up a couple of slides. This is after all a political show. So I wrote an article this week about the Iran-US turmoil. Obviously, a couple of weeks ago now, we had the Iranian proxies attack U.S. soldiers within Jordan. And we were expecting a U.S. retaliatory response. It came this week in some stages, it seems, but it was more or less directed towards Iranian proxies still. So in my opinion, Biden went a little bit soft on Iran, you could say. But in my opinion, again, this makes sense. This is an attempt to keep escalations at where they are, avoid further escalations. To me, it doesn't really seem like either Iran or the US are too interested in state-on-state conflicts. And that's at least a positive on the Middle East right now with all else that's going on down there. So, in the midst of all this, we have been talking a lot about the connection between geopolitical turmoil and oil. And that is often the go-to analysis. But that hasn't really been the case. I mean, over the past couple of months, we have seen some spikes in oil prices, but we haven't gone anywhere near the $100 per barrel mark that you would probably expect when we have almost all-out war throughout the Middle East. And in recent days, we've seen a sharp decline as well. And I know, and you as well as I, you're much younger than I, but I believe you're still educated and grown into the idea that political turmoil, especially in the Middle East, spills over to oil prices. I mean, that's probably what you've learned as well, right?
No, yeah, exactly. And it's and the strikes are very interesting. My take is obviously more the US angle, and I completely agree with your angle that he's gone very soft. That being said, Biden has warned that more strikes might be coming up, but it is very clear that he has strategically chosen not to strike targets in Iran proper, and chosen these proxy groups as well outside, completely, I should say, to kind of limit the risk of further escalation.
I agree completely. And just to sort of sum up the view on oil, we'll just bring this up again. We're hearing some rumblings today about new OPEC production cuts, perhaps even a little bit stronger cohesion within the OPEC group. That has been the main problem. I mean, Saudi Arabia has tried to cut their oil production a lot to keep oil prices up, and it hasn't really helped. Not enough for the Saudi Arabians anyway. It seems that perhaps they're getting a little bit more cohesion in the OPEC group because oil prices at a level below 80 is simply not sustainable for a lot of these countries. If we look at this a little bit more long term, as I said, you and I, Anna, grown up with or educated into the idea that OPEC controls a lot of the oil market. The US is going to war for oil. And that's really not the case anymore. I mean, this chart is one of the most important if you look long term at geopolitics, in my opinion. That's the US crude oil production in million barrels per day. The US produced a lot of oil during the 60s and 70s. It was a big boom throughout the US. It waned off in the 80s and 90s. And then it bottomed out just around the year 2000. And that's exactly when the US began to go to war for oil, if you buy into that narrative. What has changed since then? Well, two things has changed. First and foremost, the US has started to expand its oil production massively, and this is way underrepresented, in my opinion, especially in European media. I mean, the US has basically solved its dependence on Middle Eastern oil by producing oil itself. So whenever you hear the argument that the US is going to war for oil, it simply doesn't make sense. It doesn't mean that the US isn't interested in keeping oil supplies from the Middle East up, because in Europe we've chosen to do the exact opposite. We've chosen to not produce any oil at all. And therefore, for the US to keep the overall global oil prices down, they still need outflow of oil from the Middle East, obviously. But this is a very, very important chart. And the US has surpassed 13 million barrels per day. It's the largest oil producer in the world. Canada produces a lot of oil. And that is important. And that is a lesson for people when we look at your portfolio, myself included, that yes, geopolitical risk pushes up oil prices, but there are a lot of factors right now who are working, or a lot of players in the oil space who are working very actively to push prices down. That's both the US, China as well, pumping oil out of their stocks, and that helps keeps oil prices in check. So, and on top of that, we have a lot of countries like Nigeria, Angola, Saudi Arabia, others, basically expanding their oil production infrastructure. So I'm not too worried about oil prices long term. But on the other hand, I mean, the causality could turn around a little bit, that lower oil prices could lead to geopolitical tensions, because this is a major problem for countries like Saudi Arabia, Russia, Iran, and those countries. So this is
Yeah, that would be my question. That would be my question for you, is that we came out with this out-of-box piece a few weeks ago that OPEC might be dissembling in a not too distant future. How does this outpour of oil from the US play into this?
Massively. I mean, basically, OPEC is an attempt to run a price cartel on oil. To have a monopoly on oil, to set the prices as you wish. That would be illegal in most businesses, but when we're talking in the international oil trade, it's not really illegal, because who's going to judge them? Anyway, if you want to run a price cartel or a pseudo monopoly on something, you better control most of the markets. And OPEC's not doing that. OPEC is below 50%. They're controlling less than half of the market. It helps a bit for them to include Russia and Brazil in this OPEC plus, but that has also weakened the cohesion of OPEC. So if a price cartel doesn't control enough of the market and can't even agree on production cuts, then it's not a very good price cartel. And I think that's the problem right now. Saudi Arabia is still, of course, the one massive player in this field. They can influence prices by cutting their production, but their problem is that other countries are simply ramping up their productions. So if Saudi Arabia won't meet the demand for oil around the globe, other countries will. And then Saudi Arabia is basically just giving up market shares. So in my opinion, OPEC is, in the long term, in a very, very difficult position, simply because they don't produce enough oil, or that other players produce enough oil to make them less relevant anyway. Just one final note, Anne, before we head over to your big topic of this week, and that's the last chart I've brought here, which is about perhaps one overlooked aspect in the whole Red Sea Middle East situation right now, and that is the Iranian crude oil exports. So before the nuclear deal was torn up, basically a couple of years ago, Iran exported a lot of oil to Europe, to Japan, and to other countries, Africa, LATAM, etc. Those avenues basically dried up when Iran was put on a heavy sanctions regime. And the only country who would buy their oil was basically China. So what happened in 2019, 2020 was that China went to Iran and say, okay, we're willing to take on your oil. We're willing to do it more or less illegally. You can pump your oil into some of our tankers. We'll switch off the transponder so no one knows where we're going or what our initials are on the insignia on the ship is. But you have to give us some discount. And Iran has been giving China massive discounts on this. Over the years, this has been a very lucrative for China. They've basically rolled out the same model for Russia. Basically, if no one else wants to buy Russian oil, we'll buy it at a discount because Russia still needs to export it. And that is one way of limiting China's independence or dependence on, say, Saudi Arabia and the global oil market, that they have basically created a separate oil market where they can import at discounted prices from rogue states like Russia and Iran. Why is this important right now? Well, we heard some rumblings a couple of weeks ago that Iran was threatening China basically to cut these discounts to pay a higher price for Iranian oil, or else they would stop oil transports. It seems like, we don't know it, but it seems like China and Iran have reached some sort of agreement on this. And that may be also why the Houthi attacks on ships in the Red Sea haven't really spilled over into the Persian Gulf or into oil transports there, at least not yet. So it seems like Iran is still exporting oil to China more and more and more every year. And that is, even if it's not in the amounts that satisfies a large amount of the Chinese oil demand, it still satisfies some, and it still helps keeping global oil prices down from the main production hub in the world, which is still China. So just a little thing to note, that even in a market such as oil, a lot of black market activities going on that can sometimes be hard to measure in various statistics. So and I would like to switch the talk for the end of the show to Iran's neighbor, Pakistan. We talked about them a lot a few weeks ago, potential conflict, and I know you've been looking a lot at the upcoming Pakistani election. I just brought these two pictures, two persons.
Yeah.
The one on my side of the screen is obviously Nawaz Sharif. Is he still the favorite for this upcoming Pakistani election?
Yeah, 100%. So the population of Pakistan is heading to the polls today, actually, as we're recording on Thursday. And it looks overwhelmingly like Nawaz Sharif will win the election. Why is that? It's because he has the backing of the military, which has effectively ruled Pakistan since the independence in 1947. The tables have turned completely with since 2018, where Imran Khan was the insurgent candidate who seemed more favorable to the military and managed to win the premiership because he had the backing of the military. He's since fallen out with the establishment, as this deep state is called in Pakistan, and has since received 3 prison sentences worth collectively up to 30 years in prison for illegal marriages, corruption charges, you name it. Meanwhile, Nawaz has re-won the favor of the military, and he's come out of exile from London and now looking to be the overwhelming favorite.
And this pretty much suits the US just fine, I believe. I mean, Imran Khan anyway was a bit of a wild card when it came to Pakistani foreign politics. Some believed he would cut ties to the US even more. How do you think they're viewing this in Washington?
I think so. A lot of critics have actually come out against the US, why they haven't spoken up against this historically unfair and unfree election in Pakistan. And I think the reason why they haven't spoken up more is because defectively their foreign policy in Pakistan won't change, no matter whom of these two gentlemen end up taking the presidency. As I said, it is the military establishment at the end of the day who's calling the shots in Pakistan. And the pro of that, at least, is that there's quite a big level of consistency in terms of their foreign policy in particular. I was also looking into, could this have an effect on the greater Middle East conflicts we're seeing, especially as we've seen a bunch of strikes between Pakistan and Iran in the last few weeks. But these are, on the whole, quite separate to the Red Sea tensions we're seeing. It's mainly to do with these separatist movement in the border country between Iran and Pakistan. So also for the greater Red Sea conflicts, this election won't have too much of an impact.
I agree completely, and that's something we'll sometimes do in this show as well. Take up a topic that's very interesting and simply discern, is this something you should watch out for as an investor or not? It doesn't hurt to be informed about it, but this is not something you should worry about in your immediate portfolio. The long-term effects may be interesting, and we'll be sure to watch them, but nothing to freak out about, even though it may fill up the news for a couple of days, especially if there are some, what would you call them, aftershocks to this election in the streets, or what might you have. Very, very good, Anne. I know you're keeping a close eye on all the election we're having this year. We're going to be talking a lot more about the upcoming Russian election, if you can call that an election. We'll get back to that a whole lot more. I think that's pretty much what we wanted to cover this weekend. It was great having you. Next week, I suspect we'll be talking even more about Ukraine and Russia, probably, with Tucker Carlson going over there. I think that's going to stir up things massively. And I'm sure we're going to be talking a lot more about the Middle East. Perhaps the peace process in Gaza could be a topic. So anyway, stay tuned for that. If you want to hear more on our geopolitical research and analysis, as well as all our macro, crypto, EM content, head over to stenresearch.com and sign up for a free 14-day trial. If you just want to hear this show, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell button below. Thanks a lot for tuning in. Thanks a lot, you, and from Paris. We'll see you next week.
My pleasure. Bye.